You know those power stations with all the caution signs that are like, danger, high likelihood of death, or like have a picture of a skull or something? Yeah, I know I'd be lying if I said all those warnings didn't tempt my dark curiosity a bit, but I've never been inside one either. However, for the story I found this week, someone did go inside, or maybe that's what we're supposed to think. I'm Jason, and thanks for tuning in to Killer Bites. Our story begins in March of 2007. A Purdue University maintenance employee was doing his rounds in the laundry room, but when he was drying out the washing machines, he kept hearing this popping noise. And at first he thought it might be one of the machines going haywire or whatever, so he decided to check up on all of them in case there was like an electrical problem or something, you know? Well, that's the kind of sound it was, like a clipped wire or something, but all of the machines were working and the popping noise just kept buzzing in his ear, and he's like, am I going crazy? But once he actually leaves the laundry room, he hears that the popping sound is only getting louder. He's walking down the hall, taking his time to figure out where this is coming from, you know, like on his tiptoes, kind of creeping, until he finds himself in front of this padlocked door he'd never been inside of before in all the time he'd worked there. The sound was coming full blast now from the other side of this weird, unmarked locked door, like bolted shut with multiple locks, bars, levers, the whole thing. You know, giving like creepy basement door vibes, like what monsters are they keeping in there? So he tries all his keys on the big maintenance keychain, and the last one he uses, he knows he hasn't used before. And he didn't even notice he had it until now, because nobody goes in there. When the janitor finally opens the door, he gets hit with the smell. You know which one I'm talking about, but it's like a barbecue, like someone had been cooking in there. Not hamburgers and hot dogs, like someone had been cooking in there. So he flips on the lights, and the janitor doesn't find the Hunchback of Notre Dame or anything like that, but it turns out the bolted up room is the transformer vault for the dormitory he's working in, and that's why there's so many locks on the door. Nobody is supposed to be in there. He noticed there was a door on the other side of the room that goes outside, but that's the only other way in. He knows now that the popping noise is definitely coming from here, so he peeks around the corner of one of those huge power transformers to see the fried remains of a student stuck upright between two of the machines with his finger still plugged into an exposed electrical conduit, and the popping sound is coming from the sparks flying off of it and hitting the ground. So he calls the authorities, and the coroner confirms that they found the body of freshman aviation student Wade Steffi, who had been missing for almost 3 months at this point after leaving a frat party in January and was last spotted trying to get into Owen Hall, which was not his own residence, so he didn't have a key. He was reportedly walking through the snow at 12:30 a.m. on January 13th, the last night he'd been seen, to get a jacket he'd accidentally left at a friend's dorm in that hall. So what happened in the middle of the night in January up until the 16th of March to put Wade into this inaccessible transformer room? Let's dig in. January 12th, 2007 was a normal day for Wade. His friends corroborated that he was in class that day around 11:30 a.m., and he'd spent the afternoon with a new roommate looking at apartments for the next school year. He went back home around 5 o'clock and wasn't seen again until 7:20 p.m. or so, when he had dinner with friends in the Ford dining hall, which is right between his own residence hall and the one they'd go to next, Owen Hall, to pregame for the Phi Kappa Theta frat party that night. Wade withdrew $50 from the ATM at the dining hall, but he didn't stop anywhere else before going to hang out at room 139 in Owen for about an hour before trekking out into the drizzly, hazy 40-degree weather for their party around 10 o'clock. Nobody reported anything unusual was happening there. Yes, Wade was drinking and was drunk by the time he left based on the independent toxicology report, but he wasn't belligerent or completely out of his mind or anything. When he left around midnight, nobody even noticed he was gone. And this is where things get funny. According to cell phone records, Wade made 6 different phone calls as he worked his way back to room 139 to get his jacket. And Owen Hall is in a place between his own place and Phi Kappa Theta, so it makes sense that he'd want to stop and pick it up on the way, but after apparently calling a friend first to see what he was doing, he made 3 kind of random calls to people who wouldn't even be inside Owen Hall. A woman in Bloomington, Indiana stated to the FBI that a male caller she didn't know had asked her to open the front door that night, but she didn't recognize him and assumed it was a wrong number. Purdue is in West Lafayette, Indiana, so Bloomington is nowhere near the university, let alone Owen Hall itself. She later came to realize that her son had actually gone to high school with Wade, so this being 2007, maybe Wade was calling his friend's old home phone line or something, and his friend might not even had a cell phone at that time. The next call he made was to a fax machine. Yes, remember those? Fax machine with an unidentified location. After that call was made, he made another call to a resident of Ellettsville, Indiana, and she also assumed it was a wrong number, but later determined that she'd met Wade Steffi in the past. His own dormitory is only a few yards from this one, and he did have a key to that building, so if he was just trying to escape the cold, why wouldn't he just leave his jacket there, go back home, and pick it up in the morning, when he could easily get into Owen Hall? I can't help but think that maybe he's making calls for different reasons, especially if he's dialing numbers he knows enough to not be completely random, but not people who he knows are inside the hall to let him in. The fourth call he made is the most mysterious, with absolutely no information about it, besides the time that it was placed, 12:29 a.m. that night. Apparently, investigators couldn't find any information about it, which is kind of a trend in this investigation because throughout the weeks-long search for Wade, authorities never found his body inside the transformer vault, even after a visual inspection made of the vault during that search, where it supposedly had been for the entire 10-week period he was missing. So he makes this mysterious fourth call, and apparently it wasn't to anyone inside Owen Hall who could have opened the door, because he called someone who did live in the hall a couple minutes later, but there was no answer. This is where the last couple witnesses saw Wade alive for the last time. A resident had observed Wade attempting to gain entry into the dorm, but didn't let him in because he was trying the door to the women's side of the hall, and she thought he appeared intoxicated, so refused to let him enter. Maybe like a "hold the door for me" type situation, and she decided not to. Well, around that same time, another resident spotted him talking on his cell phone and appeared to her to be intoxicated as well. But no records of this phone call survived because we don't have any information about who he had actually reached on the phone and was now talking to. This was the last witness and the last call. So when his current roommate returns home from the Martin Luther King holiday 3 days later and discovers that nobody has seen Wade since the 13th, he reports Wade missing, and authorities undertake a citywide search that includes university police, local police, a missing child organization, and even the FBI. What they found, I think, is the strangest evidence in this case. Wade's shoes that weren't on his feet when they found his body wedged between the transformers, sock-footed, while authorities searching on the 18th didn't find anything unusual about the transformer vault. A community member on the search found one of his shoes outside the exterior door to the vault, the one on the other side of the room from the entrance that the janitor had used from inside the hall, but this shoe was not recovered until 5 days after the search team originally checked the vault, when another maintenance worker was cleaning the little fenced-off section in front of that exterior door. They didn't identify it as Wade's shoe at the time, and remember, they hadn't found Wade's body inside the transformer room, so I guess they figured it was just a random shoe that got swept into this little exterior fenced-off area. Weird, but okay. So if you're wondering why Wade would have taken his shoes off just to go into a side entrance of the building in below freezing rainy weather, well, you're not alone, because wondering the same thing over here. And to add another pinch of mystery to this clue, there are conflicting reports about whether his other shoe was recovered at all. Just missing shoe somewhere. Or maybe just someone found a shoe and decided one's good enough. Who knows? Some articles indicate that his other shoe was found inside the transformer room in a corner, but the official investigation doesn't report that his other shoe was found at all. Just the one outside the transformer room, and that he wasn't wearing either of them on his body when it was recovered 9 weeks later. So, after the coroner's report rules that Wade died instantly from an electrical shock between 2,000 and 4,000 volts, which entered through his ring finger and exited through his left hand and thigh, and to give you some perspective, an electric chair uses about 2,000 volts in execution, so Big blast here. The FBI conducted an investigation of the Transformer Vault security standards in parallel with a third-party investigation hired by the university. While both investigations ruled that the vault was functioning up to state codes, the exterior door could appear locked visually, but only took some minor shaking for the lock to fail and someone to gain access. To investigators, this was ample evidence that Wade, desperate to access the building, had found the side entrance and was able to open the door to the dark Transformer Vault and, intoxicated, Wade was groping around for a light switch when he accidentally inserted his finger into the open conduit and was killed instantly. An accidental death was ruled to be the fault of Purdue University's poorly functioning locks and resulted in a $500,000 settlement for Wade's family. However, this doesn't seem to completely answer questions about why Wade was so desperate to get his jacket that he'd break into the maintenance entrance of the building when he could have been warm inside his own dorm a few yards away and waited to get it in the morning. Not to mention the fact that he took off both of his shoes. The investigation ruled that he'd removed one to wedge inside the exterior door in case he got locked inside, or maybe for a light or something, but what about the other shoe? I mean, why would he take off both of them in the freezing cold? With all parties satisfied with these conclusions, the investigation into his death has ended, but what do you think? Why do you think the search party was unable to find him in the Transformer room if he'd been in there the whole time? And why would he have taken his shoes off in this freezing cold weather? Who was he trying to reach on the phone? And did he reach who he wanted to in the end and stop making calls? And what about the $50 he withdrew from the ATM? Wade was on a full-ride scholarship for aviation engineering, so he must have been pretty smart. Do you think this is a drunken accident like the university said? Or was Wade involved with another clever student or worker who would have known exactly how to stage his death to make it look like an accident? Let us know your theory in the comments. What kind of evidence could have turned this case on its head and made these outlying clues make sense? Thanks for watching Killer Bites. See you again soon. And be careful the next time you're locked out. It might be better just to come back the next day.
Did the Miami Police Department prevent the rise of one of the most prolific serial killers of a generation? Let's dive in and find out. I'm Lindsay, and this is Killer Bites, the show for bite-sized coverage of the juiciest true crime cases. We'll start out with a young boy named Jaime Gough. It's the middle of the semester at Southwood Middle School. Jaime hung out with two other kids, Andre Martin and Michael Hernandez. Almost every day, the three would meet before school by the teacher's parking lot to hang out until the bell rang for class at 8:50 a.m. Jaime, from what we could put together, seemed to admire his friends, especially Michael, the self-appointed leader of the group. Michael, an honor student and rebel, would regularly try to convince his friends to enter the building before school began. His schemes had gotten them in trouble with the school security on more than one occasion. But on February 3rd, 2004, the juvenile idea of sneaking into the school would be overshadowed by a more sinister accomplishment. Like any other morning, Jaime and Michael met up at the normal spot near the fences. Andre wasn't there this morning, and Michael didn't have the patience to wait. So he took Jaime and they made their way into the school through an unlocked door. The two of them entered the school and made their way to the upstairs boys' bathroom. Michael then convinced Jaime to follow him into the handicapped stall. What Jaime walked into was no less than a nightmare. Michael told Jaime to turn around so he could get a surprise from his bag. Michael, soon after, donned a red hooded windbreaker, cap, and latex gloves. Now brandishing a knife, Michael approached Jaime, covering his mouth and placing the knife to his neck and eventually cutting open Jaime's throat. It would later be discovered that Michael had repeatedly stabbed Jaime's neck a little over 40 times. After Michael fleshed his gloves, shoved his jacket and cap back into his backpack, he washed his hands and left the restroom calmly. What Michael wasn't expecting was for a fellow student to enter the bathroom as he exited. The student noticed a pool of blood forming in the handicap stall and a body slumped over the toilet. Soon after, the student ran out of the restroom to find school security. Security didn't take the boy seriously and dismissed his rants about needing help in the restroom. What a great attendant, am I right? Anyway, the kid tells his friend about it soon after, and the two boys returned to the restroom to investigate further. When they got there, they opened the handicap stall and saw the aftermath of the crime. Jaime was left lying over the toilet in the stall, his head resting between the wall and the porcelain. The boys saw the blood all over the stalls and ran. They immediately rushed to security and told them everything they saw. The hysterics of the two caused the adults to follow and take their words seriously. Finally, how come the first security officer on duty didn't take the kid seriously? Was it just that he didn't believe the kid telling him, or was it something else? Either way, the guy didn't check when a student was obviously in distress. Security checked the stall and found the body, turning it over and exposing the wounds on his neck. Immediately after, he called over the radio for the Miami-Dade Police Department. The security officer then went to the administrative office to get the principal or assistant principal. It's hard to believe that the officer just left the body there unattended, but he did. And when he returned, the body had been moved to the center of the stall, off the toilet. He was placed on the floor, his arms spread to his sides and his wounds left out in the open. Now easier to see that his neck was slashed. In short, someone had moved Jaime from where the officer had left him. The school was immediately put on lockdown. No one was getting in or out. A few hours passed, and the police investigating the incident entered into the classroom containing the 8th grader, Michael Hernandez. He had been recognized by one of the two original students who entered the bathroom in the morning. The police spoke with the teacher in the class first. She gave a few interesting pieces of information. First, she stated that she let students in at around 8:55, and since then, Michael had requested to go out to the restroom 3 times. He had made 2 trips before 9 a.m. During his 3rd trip, he was escorted by school security. She also let cops know that there were bloodstains on Michael's shirt. When she questioned him about it, Michael had stated that he was suffering from a nosebleed. Later, Michael was taken to an office in the school and questioned further by investigators. While there, he stated that he got a nosebleed from roughhousing with Jaime earlier, and he was hit in the face by a door. Upon further inspection, the detectives were unable to spot any open wounds or areas in his nose that could have explained the blood on his shirt. After their inspection, Michael must have gotten nervous because his story changed. His story was now one where he had been playing with Jaime in the 2nd floor upstairs bathroom, where they had split up and went to class. He returned later, and as he had entered the restroom, there was already a suspicious student inside. Michael was unfamiliar with said student, but he had told Michael that someone was acting strange in one of the stalls. As the student said this, Michael's curiosity got the best of him. He bent down low to the floor and looked under the stalls to see who or what was there. When he bent down to look under, his shirt grazed the floor and, in turn, soaked up a bit of the blood pooling. He followed up by confirming that upon looking below, he had seen Jaime in the stall. That's when he left back to class. It's strange that a kid would see his friend in a stall with blood pooling and then just turn his back on it. He didn't think to call out or even check on his friend. What's even stranger is that he would tell officers he'd seen Jaime there. Based on the position of the body, he should have easily been able to tell that something was definitely wrong with his buddy. The cops must have taken that as a bad sign, right? At the end of questioning Michael, he agreed to let them search his bag. Inside, detectives found everything they needed to clear up the gaps in the story Michael had given them. Within were latex gloves with traces of blood on them, the red windbreaker, and the cap he had worn. Upon further inspection, the officers had noticed a small incision into the backpack's fabric. The fabric had been torn, which in turn created a secret pocket. In the pocket was the very knife used to kill the victim. As soon as the officers found the evidence, they asked Michael to come with them to the police station for an official investigation. Michael agreed. At this point, it seemed that Michael wanted to be caught. This whole incident kind of seemed suspicious and lacking planning. Could this kid really be the murderer? Why would he kill his friend? And what could have prompted such animosity? It's scary to think about where his head must have been during the crime. February 3rd, 2004, 1:40 p.m. Michael is transported to the Miami-Dade Homicide Bureau office under the suspicion of murder in the first degree. It's painfully obvious at this point that Michael was a part of this and is most likely the killer, but our only question is, why? As soon as Michael was in the office, he let his walls come down. Whether it be for fear, anxiety, or even excitement, Michael let loose and told the investigators the truth about his day. It was a wildly different story from the one he had mentioned. Michael was questioned without his parents present or in the presence of a lawyer. Florida state law in 2004 allowed for the questioning of a minor without the permission from the parents, which seems a little unethical. Good thing is, a parent can step in and stop the interrogation at any moment. The real question is, where were his parents? The interrogation started out okay. The detective was pretty friendly with Michael, calling him Mike and striking up the interview as if it was a normal conversation. They started out with a simple introduction and swearing him in. This actually might have swayed Michael to tell the truth since he was only 14 years old. Actually, his birthday was on the 2nd of February, just a day prior. So he had just turned 14. Michael and the detective continued their interrogation with Michael being cooperative and eerily present. His demeanor was strange as well, giving signs that he was more excited to be noticed for what he'd done. You might even say he seemed to be bragging about it. I don't think Michael really understood how much was at stake for him. I mean, this was murder in the first degree. As the questioning continues, Michael shows his respect for the officer and the system by sitting up straight, making eye contact, and just being a model student. He answered the basic questions first. You know, which school did you go to? What is your name? What kinds of classes are you enrolled in? Surprisingly enough, he was an honor roll student in advanced classes. Michael hadn't hesitated or shown the slightest sense of right and wrong in his interrogation until they mentioned Jaime. A simple question. Do you know Jaime Gough? And at the sound of his friend's name, he hesitated.
Do you know an individual by the name of Jaime or Jaime Gough?
Yes, I do.
It's a little strange that the detective asked really direct and leading questions. Usually, protocol is for detectives to ask really open questions that couldn't be construed as leading them to a specific desired response. I guess we can probably explain it by how young Michael was. Maybe the detective thought it could make him feel like he should lie. I'm not completely sure. But Michael was being cooperative and answered each question clearly. The detective pushed forward, maintaining the momentum of your average, everyday conversation. Where was he in the morning before school and why? Like most of us who got dropped off early, I'm sure they just hung out near the fences because the administration wouldn't let them inside. In the interrogation, surprisingly enough, Michael was calmly answering with uncanny accuracy of the times and location of when things took place. He noted the cardinal direction of his location in the parking lot and even knew the time he and Jaime arrived within 5 minutes of his arrival. His attitude when speaking with the detective was strange. Watching the interrogation, it would seem a little like he was speaking to a colleague, eagerly paying attention, attentive and even expressing excitement in talking to an official. They breeze through his whereabouts in the morning and move on to who was with him on the day of the incident. All of these questions may seem pointless at first, but they are necessary. The police were probing for any information Michael could give them that they didn't already know leading up to the incident. An example is when the officer asked how Jaime was in the morning. Did he seem off? If he did seem off, they would probably change their approach in the matter of Jaime's murder, since the two were friends. The story might have changed to a mercy kill or any other number of circumstances. Because they are teens, it kind of makes motives and reasoning tricky. No offense to our younger viewers, who probably shouldn't be watching something like this, but the instabilities of a mind in development can cause things like reason and common sense to become complicated. Most explanations for this stem from brain development, really. Since he was 14 at the time, physically, his brain may not have developed in the region of the brain controlling reasoning, decision-making, and impulse control. More specifically, there are two main areas of the brain that could have been the reason for how or who Michael was. The prefrontal cortex, located in the front of the brain, is my guess and the most likely cause for Michael's actions due to its connection with planning, decision-making, and impulse control. It doesn't stop developing until your mid-20s and only really starts developing significantly in adolescence, about 13 and 14. Second is the amygdala. It deals with the processing of fear and aggression. In its development, impulsivity and emotions begin to be altered, sometimes drastically. These are just a few areas in development that seem like plausible explanations or reasons behind some of Michael's motives. It's important to keep in mind that brain development is a complex and ongoing process that can be influenced by a variety of factors, including genetics, environment, and experience. Having him repeat the actions in the morning also helps to solidify his account of the events, as well as give comparison with what the police had tried piecing together. Luckily, Michael seemed more than willing to be the center of attention, obviously thinking he was the smartest one in the room, loosening his lips and blinding him from the threat of being in deep trouble.
Who did you meet at the fence?
I met Jaime Googh.
And how did Jamie seem this morning?
He seemed like he normal hall, like he does every morning.
Did you make any suggestions to Jamie that you and him go into the school early this morning?
Yes, I did.
In the interrogation, we can see the officer asking if Michael had made any suggestions to Jaime to go inside the school early this morning. This type of question really doesn't sit right with me. The kid may be a murderer, but the question itself leads him to the desired answer. When Michael speaks, we can easily tell he thinks he is untouchable, intelligent, and just generally above others. You really think that the police didn't notice that? Of course, if Michael is in the group, we can assume he believes himself to be their leader and that anything they did would have to be his suggestion. Unaware, he walked right into their trap. Looking past this question, it was his idea to go inside the school and sneak into the second floor bathroom. These answers to the next question that followed chilled me to the bone.
Make the suggestion to Jamie to go inside the school today.
I was planning to murder him.
What? He answered so nonchalantly. I've heard people order a cheeseburger with more hesitation. His delivery was so cold. You wouldn't think he was talking about a friend of his. He showed no signs of remorse or any empathy toward the person whose life had just ended. It spawns questions of whether or not this child even understands what he'd done. He admitted to first-degree murder and probably didn't even realize it. The naivety of Michael in this situation is still no excuse for the crime he committed, but wow, he didn't even try to hide it. My mother would say he either had no fear or no sense. Since he freely admitted to murder, he is opening himself up to the highest level of punishment there is. At that time, first-degree murder in Florida had a steep price: death. Michael may have been unaware of this, or maybe he thought since he was underage, he would be spared. Unfortunately for him, Miami-Dade PD and the state of Florida take murder very seriously. For specific felonies involving anyone aged 14 and above, they can be tried as adults. For those wondering, this was one of the specific felonies. Not only that, but since the crime was so severe, he could also be convicted and sentenced to the same punishments as an adult, with the exception of the death penalty. By the way, the death penalty is still very much a thing in Florida. The funny part about this is the crime took place on the 3rd of February. Michael's 14th birthday was the second. According to the law in Florida, if a child is 13 and they commit a serious felony, there must first be a hearing to determine whether the child should be tried as an adult. But at 14, the charges and the sentencing, whether it be as an adult or not, is basically left to the discretion of the state prosecutor. That means Michael would probably be recognized as an adult, barely missing the cutoff by a day. Now, it was just left to the court. What do you think? Should Michael have been tried as an adult? Do you think he was even aware of the consequences of his actions? From the interrogation and his demeanor, I really can't tell. What I do know is that he was definitely in the wrong. And the look in his eyes made me think this kid could possibly be a serial killer in the making. His motive seemed to be something straight out of a psychological thriller. He just wanted to see if he could do it. I mean, even if we wanted to know the exact reason why, he didn't even know.
Do you know why you were going to do this?
No, I don't.
Our next question, like the detective, was, what was the plan here? Was he just going to kill his friends in the middle of the school day and then just expect to leave and continue on normally? How did he see this playing out? Did he even have a plan?
Now, what was your plan? How were you going to accomplish this?
I was going to get him into the stall, the last stall, because it's the biggest, so I'd have more room.
Now, this isn't a restroom?
This is the restroom.
On which floor?
Second floor.
Okay, and it's the male restroom?
Yes, it is.
Where is it near?
It is near the media center and the gifted U.S. history class.
Okay. And once you brought or got Jamie in there, how were you going to bring him or lure him into the restroom?
We usually go to the restroom after we get upstairs so we don't get caught by security.
Okay.
And so I knew that was going to work. I got him into the stall by saying, look, I have something to show you. So I got him into the stall and I told him to turn around because I wanted it to be a surprise. Before that, I put on the gloves. He saw me put on the gloves and I said, oh,
you're going too fast.
And I said, I like them because they're comfortable.
Michael was going too fast for the stenographer, the lady in the room taking the notes. He was probably speeding up while getting excited, retelling the murder, reliving it with an audience. I mean, it had also only been a few hours since he had killed Jaime, so it was pretty fresh on his mind. So this may have been the best time to talk to him.
Now, you and him are already in the stall, correct?
Yes.
Did he go into the stall first?
Yes.
Did you follow him?
Yes, I did.
Did you close the stall door?
Yes, I did.
Now, what transpired next?
Okay. I was talking to him and I told him, all right, now I have to put my hand over your mouth.
Okay.
And so I did, and I lifted his neck up.
Now, was he facing you or was he away from you?
He was away from me.
Did you put your hand over his mouth?
Yes, I did.
And which hand did you use to put over his mouth?
My left hand.
Once you did that, what happened next?
I had already before I put my hand over his mouth, I already put my knife out. So the blade was already out.
Now, where had you kept this blade?
I had kept it in my jacket pocket.
And what color jacket did you have on today?
I had a red jacket.
Now, is this the same clothing that you're wearing?
The detective is asking a lot of simple questions semi-rapidly. This is most likely because he wants to fact-check with evidence and Michael's account of the events. The detective asks questions with answers he already knows in order to fact-check the situation with Michael. This may sound weird, but there are a lot of people who love the recognition that comes with committing a heinous act. That's why you'll sometimes get people who confess to unspeakable crimes in order to get attention. Now, there are other reasons people might take credit for a crime they didn't commit, like protecting a loved one and even wanting a lighter sentence if they know they're already caught. My guess is the detective recognized that this child may have an obsession with the macabre and wanted attention. So he decided to test him to see if he actually knew the details of the way Jaime died. Questions like this actually have a name: control questions.
What did you do next?
I took the knife out and I proceeded to slit his throat.
Now, do you remember in which direction you slit his throat?
Left to right.
Criminals, murderers, rapists, arsonists sometimes black out or suppress the memories of committing terrible acts harming other people. They do this to preserve themselves in their mind. It spares them guilt and allows for the continuation of their lives normally. One of the most notable murderers who did this was Jeffrey Dahmer. In his interrogation with police, he stated that he was in a trance-like state and couldn't remember some of the people he had killed. It is surprising to see then that Michael was lucid throughout the events. As the interrogation proceeds, he seems to be getting excited, enthusiastic, and even boastful. It's kind of like he is enjoying retelling the story. He's even able to recall specific details of the crime, like that he used his left hand to cover Jaime's mouth and slit his throat from left to right. It's not something you'd think a 14-year-old would say. Moreover, I don't think that's something anyone should say. It's chilling to think that Michael was in complete control when he slashed Jaime's throat. Details of the event get even more difficult to hear when you think of the fact that he was aware of each of the 42 stabs with the knife, as well as the moment he slit Jaime's throat.
Did Jaime say or do anything? Did he put up a struggle?
Yes, he did. He turned around after I did that. He asked me not to kill him. So I told him, okay, I'm not going to if you cooperate.
Okay.
Which was a lie.
Right.
And so I realized that the stall door was open, so I locked it.
Yes.
And then I turned him around again and proceeded to stab him.
And where did you stab him, Mike?
I'm not positively sure, but I'm guessing around the jugular vein, right around here.
Okay.
That's what I was aiming.
Did you stab him anywhere else on his body?
Just basically the back of the neck, all through the neck.
Okay.
And once in the temple, and I think I sliced it here.
And that would be on the left side of his face?
The left side of the face.
That's tough. Jaime was pleading for his life before he died, and Michael gave him false hope. The only thoughts I have are if Michael knew at all what he'd done. His gestures in the video suggest he stabbed around the neck, maybe trying to sever it partially. This is only speculation, but when he describes it, you can plainly see he is the type that might try something like that to sate his own curiosity. This 14-year-old boy was secretly a monster lying in wait. His demeanor and cold, matter-of-fact tone might even suggest a bit of dissociation in telling the details of when and where he stabbed Jaime. This is different from his previous attitude in the interrogation. It might even suggest the idea that since Jaime was in fact one of his best friends, he wanted to separate the two. Or maybe it could mean he decided to move forward past the relationship and the prior connection he had with the person aspect of Jaime.
Did Jaime fall to the commode or to the toilet?
No, he did not. He was already positioned where he was found. I put his head under there to stop him from gasping for air.
Okay.
So it closed it up.
Oh, I see. Okay, now. I'm sorry?
So he would stop making noise.
Okay.
Remember how we said Jaime was found before his body slumped over the toilet with his head pinned between it and the wall? Yeah, that was intentional. The way Michael described it, Jaime was gasping for air, so he positioned him on the toilet, neck bent over, to prevent him from making more noise. What Michael and Jaime probably weren't aware of at that time is bending the neck and applying that downward pressure could have prolonged his life. Sadly, it wasn't long enough for help to arrive. Michael described the moments after the murder just as calmly as before. Before fleshing his gloves, he checked for any signs of life, examining his face and his eyes. Then he took off, putting his red hoodie and cap in his bag as he left the room. Apparently, Michael had been spotted exiting the bathroom, running into other students as he left the downstairs restroom. We can only assume that walking to the downstairs bathroom was meant to try and establish an alibi for his whereabouts prior to class starting. According to Michael, everything had gone to plan. He performed the murder, got out with minimal recognition, and even got to clean off his hoodie in the downstairs restroom before anyone just came in. Just one hitch. When he put his hands back into his pocket, his ring was missing. Upon going back, Michael unwittingly ran into another student in the bathroom, noting there was someone slumped over in the stall.
I went to go look, having known what was there, and I saw my ring and picked it up and then left.
Okay. Had you gone up there actually to check to see if Jamie was okay?
No, I did not.
It was strictly to check on your ring.
My ring, yes.
This interaction is a prime clue in the interrogation, integral in determining where Michael is mentally. We can clearly see here that Michael values his possessions, his things, over other people, their lives included. He later states that there were people who would have been able to identify him and recognize that style of ring. Based on his values, it is very possible Michael could have become accustomed to Jaime's presence and seen their relationship to have been akin to a child and his plaything rather than friends. Jaime may have become a possession to Michael, helping determine where Michael's mental state was, giving us a clearer picture of his unknown motive.
Had you had planned to do this to Jamie?
Yes, I did.
How long have you had this plan?
A little under a week.
And is there any specific reason why you planned this?
No, there's not.
There wasn't a reason for it. Michael had one day just decided he would plan the murder of his best friend. After his interrogation, Michael Hernandez was transported to a juvenile correction center. 4 years later, Michael pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. In his trial, a crucial piece of evidence would arise: his journal. Not only did he plan to kill Jaime, but in his journal, there was a hit list detailing all of the names of the people whom he wanted to murder, including Andre Martin and his older sister. With the list, a mission statement, Michael wrote that he was determined to cleanse the planet by murdering others. There was no sympathy from any of the jurors. On September 4th, 2008, Michael Hernandez was found guilty of the murder of Jaime Gough in the first degree and the attempted murder of Andre Martin. The second charge came from the day prior to the incident. On his birthday, Michael had asked Andre to follow him into the bathroom, similar to how he would Jaime the following day. Sensing something was off, Andre declined the offer and resisted following him further. Jaime had volunteered to go, but Michael was determined and insisted Andre needed to be first. Michael stated that he asked his friends if they would cooperate with him the following day, and Andre said he would consider it. The following day, fortunately, Andre was a no-show. This event prompted this second charge. His sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder of Jaime, and 30 years on top of that for the attempted murder charge. The imprisonment of this young man didn't change the fact that a life was taken. Michael took Jaime from his parents, family, and loved ones, and there is no way to make up for the loss they experienced. I'm sure his sentencing was not easy, but the damage he caused is indicative of the time he would later serve as his punishment. 8 years later, in 2016, Florida changed the laws regarding adolescent offenders, stating that it would be unlawful for the automatic sentencing of a minor to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The law applied not only to future cases, but cases in Florida's past as well. Michael soon submitted an appeal. According to the Miami Herald, Michael was brought in for a resentencing hearing on June 21st, 2016. He gave an apology to the family and to Andre Martin for his actions, shedding tears as he pleaded for forgiveness from his friend. Andre replied coldly, "I do not accept the apology. I found it to be not genuine. I don't believe that he underwent any changes from that time to the time when the crime was committed. I believe that it is very easy to be apologetic and remorseful when your freedom is on the line." The defense in his resentencing argued that he had been diagnosed with a serious mental illness and that he had been neglected by his parents, contributing to his actions. Another of the arguments his defense made during his retrial brought up the Eighth Amendment right of Michael. They believed his right against cruel and unusual punishment was being infringed upon. The prosecution, however, disagreed, citing Michael as a sociopath who had carefully planned and executed the murder, thus justifying the sentencing and debunking his insanity plea. That same day, Michael was resentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole by the judge presiding. The judge specifically cited the brutal and premeditated nature of the murder. At that time, he was 26. That's still extremely young. His life hadn't even started before he messed it up, spending the remainder of his days behind bars for a murder he couldn't even begin to justify. Our story doesn't end here. A mere 5 years later, after spending a total of 13 years in prison, Michael collapsed. April 21st, 2021, Michael Hernandez was pronounced dead. The cause? Cardiac dysrhythmia, an irregular heartbeat. The coroner had reported that the most likely cause of this was morbid obesity, leading to a clogged artery mixed with high blood pressure. He had died at age 31. Jaime's father soon gave a statement saying, "We were not expecting that at all. We don't want to see anyone die or hurt like that. Even though we went through what we went through, we were not happy to hear that Michael Hernandez was dead in jail." The case of Michael Hernandez was especially heinous and shockingly disturbing, especially with the interrogation footage. But there is a silver lining. Andre Martin, on August 17, 2017, finished his training at the academy and became a law enforcement officer after realizing his calling in Michael's retrial. Jaime Gough continues to live on through his parents, friends, and loved ones, and also through their actions. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you think the punishment fits the crime? Were his rights really infringed upon? Was Michael actually too young to be tried in such a way? Is it possible that he could have actually been rehabilitated? And do you think Michael's death was related in any way to his sentencing? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. My name is Lindsay, and this was Killer Bites.
While most normal 10-year-olds might spend their time playing video games, hanging out with their friends, or going out riding their bikes around the neighborhood, Mary Bell was anything but a normal 10-year-old. A pretty little girl with an innocent smile and an angelic name doesn't suggest anything other than your typical suburban child. But simply put, Mary Bell was different. Very different. Born in 1957 to a 16-year-old prostitute, you could say that she hardly had the most conventional family background. Be that as it may, that can come as no justifiable reason for some of the truly sadistic acts this horrific child committed and the twisted mind that she possessed. It's said that her mother Betty actually requested that doctors take her daughter away from her, and she was far from an exemplary parent. She would leave young Mary for long periods at a time to go away on business trips. This was inevitably upsetting for Mary, who suffered both mental and physical abuse at the hands of her unstable mother. It was ever apparent that Betty wasn't necessarily equipped to be a parent, and her own sister even caught Betty trying to give Mary away to a woman who had been trying to adopt her. However, she was able to put a stop to the underhand arrangement and get the girl back to her mother. More examples of a difficult childhood came in the form of a number of suspicious incidents that Mary found herself in. Almost too suspicious to be legitimate accidents. On one occasion, Mary allegedly fell from a window, whilst on another occasion she curiously overdosed on sleeping pills by accident. These aren't just your average bumps and scrapes that a kid gets into. These are serious incidents that caused real harm. Many people believed that the incidents were proof of her mother Betty trying to get rid of her own daughter, while others believed that she simply took pleasure in the drama and attention that came with her daughter's suffering. However you spin it, it's not good. But that's not all. Mary later declared that she was sexually exploited, and her mother made her engage with men from the age of just 5 years old. If that wasn't bad enough, she also had a very early experience of the trauma of death after witnessing her 5-year-old friend run over and killed by a bus. When you add it all together, it paints a very bleak picture of a horrific childhood that shaped a young girl to be clearly disturbed and unsettlingly withdrawn. Her traumatic early years created a callous, cold, and manipulative girl who became fascinated with violence, something she would act upon as she became one of the most notorious child murderers in history. In the weeks before her first murder in May of 1968, she had been acting particularly strange, even for Mary. On one occasion, she was playing with a 3-year-old boy when he was badly hurt after falling off an air raid shelter. The boy's parents assumed there had been some accident, but both Mary and the boy knew what had happened, and it wasn't an accident. The following day, 3 separate mothers reported that Mary had tried choking their child. After being interviewed by police, Mary was sent on her way with a flea in the ear and a stern telling off, Unfortunately, if these incidents had been taken more seriously at the time, the horror that would be bestowed on a number of families in the near future could have been spared. I guess nobody really suspects a 10-year-old to be a danger to life. But they would be wrong. Mary's first victim was a 4-year-old boy called Martin Brown. The young child was found in an abandoned building by 2 young boys. It initially appeared as though it had just been an unfortunate accident, with a bottle of aspirin found by Martin and no signs of a struggle. It was assumed he'd just taken too much of the medicine. As shocked onlookers started to gather around the scene, one such child who'd sneaked in for a better look at the body was none other than Mary Bell. It transpired that Mary had lured the innocent young boy into the building and used her tiny hands to strangle him to death. Following the incident, in which nobody, of course, would suspect that a 10-year-old girl could commit such a horrible crime, Mary was seemingly obsessed with the grief she had inflicted upon the poor boy's family. She was constantly asking how much they missed him, and on one occasion, even asked Martin's grieving mother if she could see the hapless boy in his coffin. I mean, seriously? Mary continued to talk brazenly about the boy's death and even went so far as to draw the death scene for a school assignment. She even bragged to other kids that the abandoned house where Martin was found was where she had killed someone. Mary's temper and aggression was starting to spiral out of control. She even turned on her best friend Norma, and as Martin's coffin was being lowered into the ground, she started to kick, scratch, and punch Norma in order to gain the spotlight of the moment, telling her friend that she was a killer and she was willing to kill again. A year later, on Mary's 11th birthday, Mary savagely attacked Norma's younger sister and was so vicious and aggressive that she had to be physically removed from the house by Norma's father. This episode of volatility wasn't uncommon or a surprise to anyone who knew Mary. Just a couple of months later, Mary was at it again with her friend Norma. This time, they strangled and killed an innocent 3-year-old boy called Brian Howe on some barren wasteland not far from the abandoned house where she claimed her first victim. After killing Brian, they returned to the scene to carve N and M into the boy's stomach, the initials of the 2 girls. Shockingly, Mary used some scissors to cut the boy's hair, scratch his skin, and horrifically mutilate his genitals. The 2 girls had previously broken into a local nursery and left a series of chilling notes with horrific threats and claims. Police at the time put them down as childish pranks, but following the death of the second boy, they began to look at the notes more seriously and considered them as possible confessions. The police began to question all the local children about the recent murders, and the behavior of both Norma and Mary stood out as odd for kids so young. They were seemingly excited by the whole thing and unfazed by what was happening. After Mary claimed to have seen another boy with some scissors when Brian Howe was killed, this alerted some suspicion as there had been no such information released by police. One officer who had been observing Mary during the funeral claimed how her attitude in the circumstances was bizarre, even wringing her hands with delight. This led the authorities to question her best friend Norma again, who eventually proceeded to tell them everything that had happened, what the 2 girls had done, and how Mary had told her she had enjoyed strangling the young boys. For a while, the girls proceeded to blame the other for what they had done, which forced Norma's parents to step forward to declare that it was Mary who had shown the primary violent streak. Norma Bell was ultimately acquitted of all the crimes, while Mary was convicted of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. Although psychiatrists presented to the court hearings that Mary showed clear signs of psychosis, the judge declared she was extremely dangerous and posed a very real risk to other children and was sentenced to a young offenders institution, though she would move around facilities a number of times in the coming years. Mary Bell became notorious and attracted a lot of media attention. Despite her significant role in the tortuous upbringing of her daughter, Mary's mother Betty would frequently sell stories to the press in order to make money out of the tragedy her daughter caused. After 12 years in prison, Mary Bell was released at the age of 23 and granted anonymity, meaning she could go about her life with nobody knowing what she'd done and no media to hassle her. She ultimately became both a mother and later a grandmother. Her current whereabouts are unknown, and she appears to have embraced a second chance at a positive life. The question is, should she have been afforded that opportunity having taken 2 innocent lives herself? Or does she deserve a chance at normality following the horrendous and exploitative upbringing she endured? What do you think?
Wendy Brown, a 33-year-old woman who pretended to be a 15-year-old in order to rewrite her high school experience. I'm your host, Brandy, and let's get into the story. Wendy Brown did not like her first go-around in high school. She attended Harold L. Richards High School, and apart from being a member of the track team and running long distances, the high school experience felt like hell on earth. Wendy was bullied heavily because of a speech impediment. Sometimes the bullying would turn into full-blown fights. Nothing is scarier than a teenager. Wendy would look at the cool girls on the cheerleading squad at his games and feel this massive wave of jealousy every time. She wasn't one of the cool kids, and this affected her self-esteem greatly. Wendy's home life was not much better. Wendy's relationship with her mother was abusive. Her mom would hurt her physically and would yell at her, make fun of her, and just put her down. This would only get worse for her, sadly. Wendy was just 16 years old when she started getting nauseous frequently. When she would go out for her runs, she found herself throwing up all the time. Her mother heard this news and immediately asked her if she was pregnant. She scheduled an ultrasound where she found that she was indeed pregnant and already 4 months along. Wendy's boyfriend abandoned her during this incredibly scary time. He broke it off with her and spread the news around school as a way to make fun of her. As if he wasn't directly involved, Wendy went from being bullied regularly to being bullied constantly. Once the kids at school found out that she was pregnant, they had a field day. Even though she was determined to get her diploma, the bullying was just too severe and she quit. On the day she turned 17, Wendy gave birth to a baby boy, which she named Joey, after the father. A few months later, she became pregnant again with another boy, this time giving birth to a baby girl named Jamie. During all of this, Wendy's younger sister, Jennifer, was just starting her high school career and was thriving. Jennifer even joined the cheerleading squad, which Wendy had dreamed of doing. Wendy couldn't help but feel envy and resentment. Her sister was living the life she had always wanted, while she was trying to make ends meet by working at fast food establishments and even as an exotic dancer. No shame in the game, but that doesn't mean it was easy or ideal. In 2006, Wendy got married, and most of her time was spent taking their kids back and forth between parents. Sadly, this marriage was abusive and scary. Wendy was used to the treatment, but that doesn't mean it was right. The police were constantly showing up at their place from domestic violence calls the neighbors would make. Her husband would break things or knock out windows when they would get into disagreements. It was just a scary, violent household overall. In August 2008, Wendy and her husband decided to move to Green Bay. They needed a change. You know how sometimes you just want to pack up and leave your old life behind? Wendy felt this exact way. They ended up renting an apartment next to Ashwaubenon High School. For her kids, the constant moving and abuse in the household was too much. They did not feel safe being around either parent and eventually moved in with their grandparents, Wendy's mom and dad, in Nevada. In order to pass the time, Wendy spent a good amount of her free time on social media. She would post pictures of herself, and everyone would comment on how young she looked, that she could pass for a teenager. And that's when it hit her. She could pass for a teenager. Her sophomore daughter, Jamie, was out of the apartment and in a different state. Wendy and her husband lived right across from the local high school. She could start a new life as a high school student and really change the narrative. Easy peasy. She cut her hair, went to the mall to buy new clothes, and she shifted her voice. If you already look like a kid, the only thing holding you back is sounding like one. She did this perfectly. She worked on her inflection, her tone, and morphed it into this almost California girl accent. When it was time to enroll in school, Wendy went in by herself to talk to the school's counselor. Wendy now went by Jamie, her daughter's name, and claimed that she was a transfer student from a school in Nevada. the same school that her daughter was attending in real life. She explained that her mother was always working and was super difficult to get a hold of. If the office needed to call her, they would probably have a hard time reaching her. Smooth cover, Wendy. Before the school year began, Wendy knew that her dream of being on the cheerleading squad had to come true. She was determined to make it on, because when she was really a teenager, she envied the cheerleaders. She wanted to be just like them. Now her chance at becoming one of them was closer than ever. A few weeks before the semester started, she showed up at the gymnasium to try out for the squad. She chatted with the other girls, who reassured her that the tryouts were easy. This year they had a new coach who demanded a lot from the girls in terms of demeanor and honesty. Wendy was ecstatic when learning the new cheers and chants. She felt like she was finally a part of something. In early August, the coach invited all the girls from the squad to her home for a pool party. This is so everyone could get to know each other better and bond before the year started. Wendy showed up in a one-piece with a t-shirt covering her, while the rest of the girls wore two-piece bikinis. She was trying to hide the stretch marks she received during her pregnancies, but insisted to the other girls that she had been very overweight and was hiding her body from her extreme weight loss. After the pool party, Wendy got a call from a number she didn't recognize. It was the cheerleading coach. She asked if Jaime was around. Wendy held the phone away for a few seconds, put on her Jaime voice, and answered the phone. She had made the squad. She could not wait to put on her first real cheerleading uniform. It was like everything was slowly falling into place. Academically, Wendy had already learned what her teachers had covered. She could handle the difficult science and was put into advanced classes. However, she was very timid and felt nervous when it came to math, which was noted by school staff. Wendy tried out her other talents, like singing. When she went in for choir and belted out, the choir teacher remarked how mature sounding her voice was. They put her into the senior choir almost immediately. Wendy did not feel like going to school all the time. Why would she? She went to her first day, but would take multiple days off to recuperate. But that's when the school got involved. Why would a kid show up for the first day but not the rest? They wanted to get to the bottom of it. They contacted Jaime's old school in Nevada. Then they called Jaime's home, where Wendy's parents answered the phone. That's when they discovered Wendy had been using her own daughter's identity to pose as a high school sophomore in a different state. That's when the police got involved. As they were building their investigation against Wendy, they discovered Jaime was not the only person she was pretending to be. In fact, she posed as her apartment's building manager, relieving a 21-year-old potential tenant of almost $800. The police found Wendy and took her in for questioning. She admitted that she wanted to get her high school diploma, as she had missed out on that opportunity when she was of age. She wanted to join the school's cheerleading squad because she wanted to fulfill her fantasy. So much of her childhood was taken away, and she wanted to feel like she was in control. Obviously, this spread around the school, and everyone was talking about the 33-year-old woman who pretended to be her 15-year-old daughter. Can you even believe? Imagine going to cheer practice with this person thinking nothing other than, wow, I'm becoming friends with my fellow cheerleaders, only to find out that she's twice your age and wanting to relive her high school experience. A psychological evaluation was done on Wendy, and they found that she was suffering from bipolar II disorder, PTSD, and 2 different personality disorders. So here's the thing, it wasn't as if Wendy had murdered someone, right? She was not this criminal trying to ruin other people's lives. She was just dealing with some serious mental health issues and was not receiving treatment. Her fantasies became delusions, and she thought she could rewrite history. Obviously, this backfired. Then the media got a hold of the story. If it wasn't weird enough, they made it even worse. They poked fun at Wendy, making fun of her for wanting to be a teenager again. She was beyond embarrassed. The courts agreed that Wendy was not some terrible criminal. Sentencing her to prison felt unnecessary. In fact, all it would do would make her mental health that much worse. Instead, she was found not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect and was instead asked to get treatment. She was committed to a mental hospital for 3 years to get help. Sadly, if she had gotten treatment during her high school years from the intense bullying and abuse from her mother she endured, maybe things could have turned out differently. While Wendy was in the mental health facility, she began studying for her GED. Regardless of if she was allowed back into the school, she was determined to have that degree. After she took the test, the results were delivered to her. She finally passed. During her stay at the facility, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. She went through chemotherapy and 2 surgeries to save her life. She survived. After Wendy was released, she divorced her husband. She had learned a lot during her time in treatment, and she knew that staying with an abuser would only end her back up in a place like that. Wendy and Jaime do not have a relationship. As you can imagine, a massive amount of trust was lost after Wendy did what she did. Jaime is now a mother with a child of her very own. Perhaps the two can reconcile, but it's gonna take some time. After 30 years, Wendy got to walk across the stage in a cap and gown to receive her certificate. Her father was there to cheer her on. Wendy knew that what she did was wrong, but after enduring such a hard life, it's hard to fault her entirely. Sure, she shouldn't have stolen her daughter's identity, but untreated mental illness can make you do all kinds of things. I'm just glad that she finally received treatment. I hope that one day Wendy and Jaime can have a relationship again. I'm sure there's much more to their story, but maybe in the future they can finally come together as Wendy and Jaime. Not Jaime and fake Jaime. Well, everyone, that is it for today's story. What did you think of this one? Have you heard this story before? This was my first time hearing about it. I was shocked when I read it, but I also have compassion for Wendy. Let's just hope that she continues to live her life as herself and not as someone else. Side note, can you imagine getting away with something like this? I know some people have young faces, but imagine being in your 30s getting away with pretending to be a 15-year-old. Well, I guess people in Hollywood have been doing that since the dawn of time, right? Thank you all for joining me on this episode of Killer Bites. I'm your host, Brandy. Until next time, stay safe and be true to you. See you later.
Schools are supposed to be a place where parents feel like their kids are safe and taken care of, right? Well, scary things can happen anywhere, and in the case of these 3 different lockdowns, the schools kind of set themselves up for it. One of the schools never even found the guy they were on lockdown hiding from. So this first story happened in October at a middle school. A kid that we'll call Heather was eating her lunch at the table when she heard 4 loud bangs. It was storming that day, so Heather thought it must have been thunder, but the rest of the school started flipping out and screaming. Then the security guard officer came out and told everyone to go into the common room. They started filing everyone into the common room ASAP. Like, even made the kids who were in line buying lunch throw their food away. Okay, that seems a bit dramatic. Like, why did they make them throw away their food when they could have just put it back or set it on the table or something? Why waste a perfectly good tray of food? But then again, this was a middle school cafeteria food, so maybe having them throw it away was a blessing in disguise. So everyone was coming into this room and no one knew what was going on. There were teachers guarding all the exits and security was trying to cover all of the windows with curtains. Heather's friend, Eric, went up to one of the teachers and asked what was going on. There was apparently a crazy man who had barricaded himself in front of his house, which was close to the school. He was threatening to take his own life and knock out the cops if they evicted him. Well, that's one way to avoid getting evicted. But also, how does that have anything to do with the school? So apparently, after this whole eviction stunt, this man was seen walking around outside the school staring at kids. The dude was also a registered sex offender, so I guess the staff was really freaked out about it and made the decision to just go on lockdown. Okay, so I agree that the whole situation is creepy and concerning, but to go on a full lockdown seems a little bit dramatic. Like, could they just first get a security officer monitor this dude and have the cops come on site and handle the situation? I just think it's a bit odd that they literally went into a lockdown for a man staring at kids. I wonder how they explain that to the concerned parents. So the kids ended up staying in that room for an hour on lockdown. Oh my God, I bet they were so hungry. After everything was handled, whatever that means, the students were walked back to their class one by one. How are they going to just say it was handled and not go into detail about what happened? They seriously made these kids throw away their food, put them through an entire lockdown, and then left them in the dark with what actually went down, and we don't know much else about what happened that day. But Heather's friend Brandy had a super creepy story about this man. So Brandy lived down the street from this psycho dude. She told Heather that one Halloween she saw through the guy's window that he was cutting his arm and writing something in the liquid on his window. He wrote, "Don't come here or I'll kill you." What? That is so terrifying. Also, that is so extra that he went out of his way to write it in his own fluid. Is anyone gonna tell this dude that they make markers and paint for that kind of stuff? Since it was Halloween, everyone in the neighborhood assumed it was a weird way of decorating, but now they know that this man is insane and probably meant what he wrote. Oh yeah, and I didn't even think about him writing that on Halloween, so no one would find it suspect. That also makes me wonder if anyone ended up going up to his door for candy. Like, oh my God, this house is so committed to the whole Halloween thing. Like, they even wrote on the windows, we have to go there for sure. But what I can't get over is how weird that whole lockdown story is. Like, the officers never explained what the banging noises were and never told the kids what was actually going on. This next story took place on a Friday afternoon right before spring break. For this story, we'll call the main student Jordan. Jordan was sitting in his 7th period calculus class playing a trivia game to pass the time when the dean came onto the intercom. He frantically told all the teachers to go into lockdown and said it wasn't a drill. Jordan's teacher freaked out, ran to turn off the lights, and got all the kids to huddle down in the back of the room. I would be panicking at this point. School lockdowns have always scared me, like something that about the thought of just someone specifically coming out of their way to hurt kids just does not sit well with me. And it seems to be a terrifying situation experience in general. I remember lockdowns, and when we did the drill, that was scary enough. I don't need to experience something real. So Jordan and his classmates had been sitting in the back of the room for about 2 minutes when the buzzing that typically came from a wall panel in the room stopped. Everyone in the room assumed the school just had their power cut. Oh no. Not the power. That automatically makes things so much scarier. Like, there's a reason most horror movies take place in the dark. Like, it's a straight fact that dark equals more scary. Jordan and his classmates heard a man running down the hallway screaming, and at this point, 2 girls in the class started crying. Oh yeah, I'd be crying too. And the worst part about this lockdown is that you have to try to stay quiet. So we're trying so hard not to make noise by crying, but that's impossible. So a man is running down the hallway and screaming, and the 2 girls are crying. The screaming kept getting louder until the man started pounding on the locker saying he was going to egg everyone. That's not concerning at all. Then the banging moved from the lockers to Jordan's classroom door. And then the biggest school lockdown no-no happened. One of the girls who had been crying screamed out, "No!" The man kept banging even harder and started to shout, "Open up!" At this point, the 2 girls who were trying to silently cry were crying out loud. So everyone in the room was panicking, thinking they were done for, when the man stopped banging and just ran down the hallway away from Jordan's classroom. Wait, hold on. He just ran back down the hallway? How did he go from wanting to slay them all to just giving up like that? I don't understand this guy. Then 10 minutes later, the dean came over the intercom. He said that a mentally unstable person had come into the school and attacked a lady at the front desk who screamed and ran out of the building. The other teachers and staff in the area were freaking out and didn't know if the stranger who went after her had weapons or not. Oh, and did I mention that this happened before the school had cameras installed? And apparently they didn't even have a security guard on campus or anything. So they didn't really know what was happening or where this man went. So my question is how does a school not have cameras or even a security officer? How is that safe? It makes me wonder how much stuff these kids actually got away with, or how many other stragglers snuck in. So since the school staff didn't know what was happening, the dean got over the intercom to tell everyone to go into lockdown while they did a sweep of the hallways and classroom. They didn't end up finding anyone, so the dean got back on the PA system and told the teachers to go back to teaching with the doors locked and to not let one of the students go. How do they know that this man isn't still running through the halls if they don't have cameras or a security guard? Like, the dean is just guessing at this point and gambling with all the kids' lives. Oh, yeah. And there's a bad guy running through the halls with a possible rifle, but we don't see him anymore. Well, one of the janitors was working the overnight shift when they found the man in the school. Yeah, they found him inside the school. So that means he must have been in there the whole time. And how did no one else see him earlier in that day? The man was asleep and apparently had a .44 Magnum sticking out of his pocket. Okay, so He literally had a revolver in his pocket the whole time and must have never used it. They dodged a bullet with that one, literally. And the janitor called the cops, but must have done something to accidentally wake up the man, because by the time the police could arrive on scene, the man was gone and was never seen again. Wait, the police couldn't find the man at all? Did they even check the whole school? He couldn't have gone too far. Like, if the janitor had just called on him, how do we know he didn't just sneak into the closet or something to hide? I also wonder if all the students and the teachers just came into the next day and tried to act like nothing happened. Oh, good morning, class. Disregard the most confusing, traumatizing event that happened yesterday, and let's pretend like our school isn't dangerously open to the public for a crazy man to come in. But let's go over yesterday's homework. I have to say, all I hope is that they finally installed those cameras. And last, but certainly not least, another lockdown story. So a 22-year-old guy, who we'll call Matt, had just graduated college and got a job. His new job was at his old high school, which is a little awkward in the first place, but wait until you hear what his job actually was. He was hired as a tech intern in the school basement. The basement. Like, the tech intern part is fine, but I just think it's so weird that he was put in the basement. And it was probably already awkward that he was working with all of his old teachers. Well, even though Matt was in the basement, it was actually pretty nice. He shared an office down there with 2 other people. In the basement office, they decked it out with too many fridges, a flat screen TV, and even air conditioning. Okay, but no matter how hard you try, it's still a basement. So Matt got this job from his old teachers who recommended him for it. Everything was running smoothly until the unthinkable happened. Matt was alone in his office on his lunch break, eating a sandwich when he got a call. It was from one of the school staff members. She said the school was going on lockdown because someone got into the school and may be armed. So here's Matt alone in his office in the basement just a few weeks into his new job when he's told they're going on lockdown. Matt turned off all the lights, but the door to the basement didn't even have a lock on it, so he couldn't lock the door. Wait, this whole setup is so tragic. And since he's in the basement, it's not like he could plan a windowscape or anything like that either. Matt turned off his computer screen light, texted his 2 coworkers who were nowhere to be found, and hid in the dark. I would be so nervous if I were him. Like, I used to get scared playing hide and seek, so I can't even imagine playing it with higher stakes. Matt had been hiding in the basement for like 20 minutes when the door opened. Matt heard footsteps and couldn't tell if they were from his coworkers, so he stayed quiet. The footsteps got louder, so Matt crawled underneath the desk. Then Matt got a text and his phone dinged. Bro, everyone knows you have to keep your phone on silent on a time like this. At this point, it was obvious to the mysterious footstep person that Matt was in there, so he came out from underneath the desk. The guy was wearing a red flannel, jeans, and a hat. He told Matt, "It's okay, I'm just down here hiding with you." Matt asked what was going on, but the guy didn't answer and just asked him where the exit was. Matt pointed him towards the exit and then asked the guy who he was. The guy said he was coming to pick up his kid from school when he was told to hide. Then Matt got the scariest text ever from one of his coworkers. Matt's coworker told him that Sheesh. Dude, this is creepy. We're telling scary stories of the thunderstorm? Matt's coworker told him that some guy with a Glock had hit one of the teachers with a bullet. He said that the guy who did it was wearing a red shirt and a hat. Hold on, stop. That means that guy hiding with Matt is literally the intruder and he has a weapon. And they're in the basement together. What a perfect disaster. Well, after reading that text, Matt lost his cool and was obviously showing it on his face. Yeah, how do you hide the fact that you're just found out that you're sitting next to an intruder with a Glock? Since he knew the bad guy was onto him, Matt got up and ran for the exit. When Matt was running out, the flannel man fired at him, but it rebounded off of something in the room. Matt was able to make it upstairs without getting hit, and the police were able to catch and arrest the bad guy moments later. The teacher who was hurt ended up surviving, and it turned out that the bad guy had just some drama with that teacher. Okay, I don't care how mad you are at someone, but you don't just go breaking into a school with a firearm and make the entire school go on lockdown because you had beef with one person out of the whole school. That's just selfish in my opinion. And poor Matt didn't even know any of the school except his old teachers, so how was he supposed to know the flannel man wasn't really the parent of a kid? Or maybe he was a parent and the reason he was mad at his teacher is because his kid got a bad grade on something. Well, all of these stories are wild. And what is with all of these weird schools? Like, One of them shuts down the school for a guy who looked creepily at kids. The other doesn't have any cameras on campus. And the last one has a makeshift office in the basement where they stick the new guy. Well, at least all of these stories ended up without someone losing their life, thank God. Well, that we know of. Thanks for watching, and cupcakes, always remember to keep your phone on silent when you're hiding from someone. Just a tip. Mackenzie Cowell was one of the most dedicated girls on the planet. While she was still in high school, she decided to enroll in cosmetology school. That decision is what ended her life. Well, not directly, but it definitely had an effect on the whole thing. So Mackenzie was a forced beauty school dropout who was terminated by her own classmate, or at least that's what most people think. After her body was found, the investigation got more confusing than ever and is still a bit iffy to this day. Think you can solve the case once and for all? Well, let's find out. Mackenzie Cowell was born and raised near the town of Wenatchee, Washington, also known as the apple capital of the world. She was a passionate, strong 17-year-old girl who would do anything for her family and her boyfriend, Joaquin. In high school, Mackenzie was on the dance team, the Applettes. Dang, these people really did take the whole Apple thing seriously. So even though Mackenzie was still in high school, she decided to enroll in classes at the cosmetology school nearby. Mackenzie's parents mentioned she was super into fashion and modeling, so this was kind of on brand for her. As you can imagine, Mackenzie had a pretty packed schedule. She was one of those people who would just wake up at 6 a.m. just to fit everything in her day. Me being an early riser, I think some people would agree that I'm not. One February night in 2010, Mackenzie made plans to have dinner with her dad at the house. But as the evening rolled around, she still wasn't home, and I'm sure her dad was getting really hangry. That afternoon, Mackenzie was at beauty school, but she was supposed to be finished around 5 p.m. At 5:40, when Mackenzie still hadn't made it home, Reed Cowell gave his daughter a ring and it went straight to voicemail. He kept blowing up her phone before giving up and deciding to wait it out a bit to see if Mackenzie would call him back or show up to the house. Yeah, I mean, she definitely could have stood him up or forgotten about it or something, but sadly that wasn't the case. And at 8 p.m., a rancher called the cops to report a strange red sedan that had been left in the driveway since at least 7 that night. An officer went to check out the abandoned car and looked up the license plate, which is when they found out it belonged to Mackenzie Cowell. In the car, investigators found Mackenzie's purse and some of her clothes, but her cell phone and debit card weren't there. That's when they speculated Mackenzie had been abducted. And after that connection was made, the police called Reed to tell him his daughter's car was abandoned and that they thought she might be missing. That must have been a tough call. And I wonder if Reed had eaten by that point or not. Either way, I'm sure he lost whatever appetite he may have had after hearing the news. The next morning, a huge search ensued to find the teen girl. And as much as everyone had hoped Mackenzie would be discovered alive, sadly, that wasn't the case. The detective's first move was to find out where Mackenzie was last seen. As I mentioned earlier, she was supposed to be in class at beauty school, so that's where the cops went to figure out what happened in Mackenzie's last known moments. They found out she had asked one of her fellow classmates around 3 in the afternoon if she had a sign out for a 15-minute break off campus. After that, Mackenzie left the building and walked to her car, which was parked in a lot behind the school. Police were able to recover video footage from a nearby surveillance camera to confirm this part of the story. After she made it to her car, Mackenzie texted her boyfriend, Joaquin, "Hey, what a riveting text, full of love and full of passion." Not, come on, hey? 20 minutes later, Joaquin texted back saying, "Hey," but he never got a response. And Mackenzie and Joaquin were already dating, so I don't think she was trying to play hard to get or ghost him or anything like that. Like, by that point, it was very clear that they were both into each other, enough to be dating. Like, I mean, I guess that's what dating culture is. You date them, and then if you don't want to see them ever again, you just ghost them. That's how that works. All right, so after the couple's boring text exchange, no one saw or heard from Mackenzie ever again. Investigators tried to track down the location of her phone, but at that point, it was either dead or it had been shut off. Mackenzie's abandoned car didn't really give detectives any other clues either. So the search continued until the girl's corpse was found on February 13th, 3 days after her initial disappearance. Mackenzie's remains were discovered on the banks of a Columbia River at Crescent Bar, about 20 miles away from where she was last seen. She had all of her clothes on and her feet were in the water. There was also a blade stuck in her shoulder when she was found. After detectives thoroughly investigated the scene, Mackenzie's body was sent off for an autopsy. Medical examiners found puncture wounds on her neck, gnarly injuries on her head, and proof that her attacker tried to saw off one of her arms after she passed. Whoa! Which I'm guessing is what the shank in the shoulder was about. Officials concluded Mackenzie's demise was ultimately caused by her being smothered in combination with the intense wounds on her neck. On February 25th, a memorial service was held for the 17-year-old girl. It was already sad enough that Mackenzie lost her life, but at this point, no one knew who was responsible. I'm sure her family wanted closure, as did everyone else in the newly panicked town of Wenatchee. As soon as Mackenzie's body was found, detectives called in Joaquin for questioning. He was given a lie detector test, and when it asked if he knew who was responsible for taking out his girlfriend, Joaquin said no, but the lie detector said otherwise. I mean, there are plenty of stories out there where people are slain by their significant other, so this definitely wouldn't be the most taboo case outcome. And while officials may not have believed him at first, Joaquin ended up having a super solid alibi, so he was ruled out as a suspect. Detectives then came up with a theory about another man Mackenzie could have been attacked by, Herman's boyfriend Joey. Mackenzie absolutely hated Herman's Boothang and was known for getting in fights with him. In fact, the day before she went missing, she got in a huge blowout fight with Joey, which seems like a pretty solid reason for him to go after her. Apparently, Mackenzie once told her mom it was either him or me. So maybe Joey was super competitive and was just trying to make sure he won the ultimatum. I mean, I'm competitive, but not that competitive. Well, as much as it seemed like Joey was the perp, detectives couldn't find anything that linked him to the crime, so he was released and ruled out as a suspect. For the next 2 months, investigators tried to determine the identity of Mackenzie's slasher, but they were unsuccessful. And that's when Liz Reed came waltzing into the picture. Liz was a full-time college student, former substance user, and police informant who was quite the talker. And for whatever reason, she decided to come forward with information about Mackenzie's big event 2 months after it all went down. Liz told the cops that there were 2 dudes who were responsible for Mackenzie's slaying. The guys were hardcore dealers and Liz was friends with them in real life, which makes me wonder if she was just making this up to try to get back at them. Well, Liz said that these 2 guys somehow got Mackenzie mixed up and thought she was an informant, so they snuffed her to prevent them from getting caught. Liz told investigators this whole elaborate story and even gave details about the tools used at the incident. She apparently knew all of this because the 2 men showed her a video of the attack, or at least that's what she said. Investigators kind of believed Liz's story at first, but as the investigation continued, they started to get skeptical. Officials looked everywhere for the alleged video of the incident, but after months of searching without any luck, they started to suspect little Miss Liz wasn't telling the truth. Couldn't they have just set Liz up to the lie detector test just like Joaquin? That way it wouldn't be a mystery of whether she lied or not. As their suspicions grew, detectives made the call to bring Liz back in for another little Q&A sesh. And that's when she took back her entire story. Yeah. The woman all of a sudden said she felt threatened by the police into coming up with a story to spare herself from getting convicted. Now, this is making me think Liz may have done it. I mean, she came up with a whole story and served with the dramatics and everything. I mean, maybe she just wanted to pursue a career as a novelist because Homegirl sure whipped up quite the tale out of thin air. But Liz was never considered a suspect because someone else swooped in and immediately jumped in on number 1 on the ranks of possible perps. So the cops were tipped off by a handful of people about a 29-year-old dude named Chris, who was one of Mackenzie's classmates at cosmetology school. In one of the letters, someone sent to the police to rat out Chris. They claimed he had a weird obsession with corpses, the afterlife and famous mass executioners. If this happened nowadays, I feel like that wouldn't even be a red flag since everyone in the world is addicted to true crime shows, including you, because you're watching this one. Gotcha. But on top of Chris's possible normal fascination with all things gory, he had a big old tattoo of Hannibal Lecter on his arm and apparently used to work in funeral homes where his favorite thing to do was cut people up. Now that is not a normal passion. But as soon as the detectives started pursuing these letters, they ran into the same issue where they were uncertain about the truth behind the writing. One of the letters was written by a police informant who was friends with Chris, but apparently had an extensive history of mental illness. And get this, the dude wrote the letter while he was in jail for exposing himself to a barista. I guess he really wanted that oat milk with no foam. So this case was becoming more and more difficult for investigators to conduct. Since there were so many people throwing Chris under the bus, officials started looking into him a bit more. Detectives reviewed video footage from cameras at the beauty school that afternoon and spotted Chris leaving 72 seconds after Mackenzie. Now that's interesting. I love how specific they got with the timing on that though. 72 seconds, like that's really specific. Those 2 extra seconds, they really did seal the deal. None of Mackenzie's other classmates initially mentioned anything suspicious about Chris leaving that afternoon because he slipped out through another door right after Mackenzie left, so they probably didn't think he was going to go after her. Chris lived right down the street from the school in the same direction Mackenzie was seen driving her car after she pulled out of the parking lot. A few other things that put Chris on the suspect radar is that he never went back to school that evening and didn't have an alibi for the rest of the day. Well, other than the claim that he picked up cupcakes for his mom, which doesn't really take that long. He would have still had plenty of time to whack Mackenzie, and in the days following the big event, Chris wasn't showing up to school. I guess he wasn't up for learning to cut a bob since he was still processing what he'd done to his classmate. After searching through Chris's phone records, investigators found out he had been texting his ex-girlfriend Tessa. Please do not tell me he's one of those people who tries to be friends with his exes. That's never a good idea. I have some exes that I don't talk to. There's a reason for that. So Chris talked to Tessa 8 different times between 3:30 and 6 that evening. Now Tessa was dating another guy at the time who lived just 3 miles away from Crescent Bar, which is where Mackenzie's remains were found. When Tessa's phone records were searched, officials found out she called her boyfriend twice, around 6 and once at 9. And her 9 o'clock phone call was super intense. Tessa told her boyfriend that something really, really bad has happened, and then asked him to pray for her. Tessa's boyfriend was all like, "Oh, you believe in God now? That's interesting because you told me you were against religion." Homegirl must have really been going through it if that was the case. Well, it seems like Tessa was tight with all of her past lovers because one of her other ex-boyfriends told investigators she came by his place sometime around February 9th to pick up some things and mentioned she looked super agitated and nervous. Apparently she came over and talked with the guy for 20 minutes before she left without picking up any of the things she claimed she was there for. So now it's looking like Tessa is involved somehow, but the police still thought Chris was their main guy. In addition to Chris's disturbing fascinations, sketchy school skipping tendencies, and his lack of solid alibi, he also matched the description of the perp given by an eyewitness. Alrighty, now all we need is some evidence, and I think there's a pretty solid case against this dude. In the initial crime scene search, detectives found a piece of duct tape with a strand of hair on it. There was also DNA evidence in Mackenzie's car under her nails and in the blade in her shoulder. That August, officials were able to obtain a DNA sample from Chris. Test results determined Chris's DNA was a pretty solid match for the hairy piece of duct tape, but none of the other samples. And the investigators weren't really that worried because the biggest DNA link was the duct tape evidence anyway. Since the detectives knew they had Chris on lock, they took him back for another round of questioning, and here's where they got super smart, or maybe just lucky. So, the interviewers asked Chris if he had ever been to Crescent Bar, and he said no. Then the detective said, "Well, you know your DNA was, right?" And that's when Chris had the biggest oh shit moment of his life. He got all flustered and told the cops, "Well, I don't know how that could be. I want a lawyer." After that, the detectives officially arrested Chris. Officers ended up searching Chris's apartment where they found a huge liquid stain on the carpet that was a match for Mackenzie's DNA. Investigators also found out about a suspicious video Tessa recorded on her phone. At the time, Chris was geared up to move out, so he was checking to make sure that his apartment was clean so he could get his security deposit back. In this video, Tessa walked into Chris's apartment, moved his coffee table to the side, and focused on a huge liquid stain on the floor. Chris asked Tessa, "Does it look clean?" "Yeah, it's clean, considering." After the initial incident, Chris went to trial. He literally didn't make eye contact with anyone, which automatically makes me think he's guilty. Chris stuck with his whole cupcake alibi and claimed he was innocent. He said he didn't know Mackenzie that well and wasn't even in the same year as her in school. Chris's lawyer came up with the story that the cops were the ones who covered his carpet in Mackenzie's fluid so they could avoid the embarrassment of not having a perp identified and arrested. And as crazy as it sounds, the cops of Wenatchee actually had a pretty sketchy past of framing innocent people as the suspects of major crimes. So in the mid-90s, there was a series of cases known as the Wenatchee Witch Hunt, where dozens of people were wrongfully committed for harming children. All of the charges were later dropped because the detectives were clocked for gathering false confessions, not handling child witnesses properly, and using evidence that was based on the recovered memory theory. So after hearing that story, I'm pretty sure you can imagine the carpet stain wasn't that strong of evidence anymore. The defense was also pointed out that when Mackenzie was slain, her jugular vein was hit, so there would have been much more fluid on the floor and around the apartment if that was the true crime scene. And as if things weren't already confusing enough in Chris's trial, Liz changed her statement yet again. "Make up your mind, woman." Instead, she went back to her old story that Mackenzie was offed by these two dealers, but still couldn't find the alleged video she saw that showcased the brutal event. Liz said the two dudes took Mackenzie to a secluded bluff and knocked her out. Apparently, one of the bad guys told Liz about it and even showed her Mackenzie's ring to prove it. But both men denied Liz's story and claimed that they never were involved with Mackenzie. So at this point, Mackenzie's case is all over the place. Chris seems like he was the perp, but now things were muddy. Thrown in 2 random dealers and a sketchy police force, and you've got yourself one bamboozled jury. Before this final decision could be made, Chris entered a plea deal. Even though he still claimed innocence, he decided to plead guilty for Mackenzie's crime in exchange for a 14-year sentence, with the possibility of getting out in 10 with good behavior. Today, Chris is still in jail, where he has continued to maintain his innocence, but he did mention he regretted getting the Hannibal Lecter tattoo. And that's all we know, or I guess don't know, about Mackenzie Cowell's case. There are so many questions that remain unanswered, so that's why I'll leave it up for you to decide. Do you think that Chris did it, or was it all just a police cover-up? I'm still trying to decide myself, so until then, I'm gonna eat me some cupcakes. I'll see you guys next time.